Welcome back to the Hall of Sports podcast, and this is another football after show. Again, I am joined by Joe and Haider, my usual guests for this show. But today we also have Callum with us. How are you doing today, Callum, just to start off with?
Yeah, I'm doing well, and I'm really excited to be here. It means a lot to be invited. I've been a fan of the show for a while now, since I've been following yourselves on Twitter. So, as I say, delighted to be here, and thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. How are you doing today, Haider?
Oh, mate, work's kicking in now, isn't it? You know, about a week and a half, nearly 2 weeks now, with my feet under the table. But yeah, I'm great. Great to be back. Great to have Callum on as well. He's doing some fantastic stuff. And yeah, looking forward to the show, mate.
Absolutely. And Joe, yourself, we just saw the draw for the FA Cup. How are you feeling after that?
Yeah, a little bit like Haider said off air, mate. I'm buzzing that it's just been a fair draw for a change, and that, like I say, City haven't got to buy into the next round. Tough one for us, but you want to probably get these tougher games out of the way earlier on, then, and hope that that the draw might pave the way for it to be an easier run towards the final, because you just don't know what happens in the cup. Obviously, if Everton beat City and that, then it opens it up altogether, and then it probably gets a bit easier as you go on. Funnier enough.
Yeah, look, it's great that we get to talk about all this. Like, I know yourself, Joe, and Haider, that a lot of it for us is usually Manchester United, but it's good to have this show on where we get to talk about kind of football in general, because there's been a lot of topics. Before we kind of get started, I just want to make sure everybody knows just to go on to the Hall of Sports podcast YouTube page and kind of follow us on there. We'll have this show on pretty much every single week, so just make sure you set that reminder so you can kind of get your comments in. And what we're going to do is we're going to start kind of at the top of the table. And the main reason I wanted to do that is just because of how good Manchester City have been over the last while. Because I think there was a lot of different teams wanting to kind of push up. We saw the whole are United in a title race, what's going on with Liverpool. But then we've seen City in the last couple of weeks where they really dominate. I think they've won 13, 14 games in a row in all competitions. It's been in a ridiculous run of form. I'll start with you, Callum. How have you been impressed with Manchester City this year? Because, again, no recognised striker really for the entire season. There's been the odd game with Aguero or Gabriel Jesus. But other than that, City have really done it without a striker, and they've been probably one of the most impressive teams in the Premier League.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been very impressed with them, because not only the Aguero situation with injury, but I felt last year Laporte being injured was a massive moment in the season. It boosted Liverpool. It certainly derailed City in many senses. But now, with the recruitment of Ruben Dias and the partnership he's been able to strike up with John Stones, Laporte incredibly is finding himself out the team at the moment, which, if you ask most Manchester City observers last season, they definitely wouldn't have predicted that, because he was so integral. And as I say, he was the man who a lot of Man City fans had said if we had him fit all season, we probably would have beaten Liverpool to the title. So I've been impressed with them, because their midfield options are very good, and they've all stepped up to the plate at different times. You think of Ilkay Gundogan, he's stepped up to the plate. Kevin De Bruyne, for me, is the best player in the Premier League, I think. I know Bruno Fernandes, from a Manchester United perspective, is on form. You could make a fair argument to say he is as well. But De Bruyne, for me, he has goals, he has assists, and he's one of those players that can control the tempo of a game. And I don't think we see many of those players in football anymore. I always think back to someone like a Paul Scholes, who, if Scholes was to slow a game down, it would slow, and if he was to speed it up, it would speed up. And De Bruyne is capable of that for City as well. So I think it's been impressive, as you say, because the likes of Raheem Sterling and Phil Foden have been able to play in a false nine role. And let's be honest, at times you haven't noticed they don't have a recognised striker, and they deserve credit for that, because I'm someone who's old-fashioned. I quite like having a recognised striker, or I like to linger back to the two up top in a particular system. You think of some of the partnerships you've been able to watch through the years, and I miss that. But if you're a Man City fan, you won't be complaining, because Foden in particular recently has been has been absolutely sensational. And if you are an England supporter and the major tournaments are obviously on the horizon, you have to be excited about what he can add to the England side with the form that he's in, because the talent's always been there. The one thing that he's always been levelled with is he doesn't play enough games, and does Pep really trust him? And a lot of people had said when David Silva left the club, it would be make or break for Foden in terms of being a first-team regular. And to be fair, he's answered all the questions this season, and good luck to the lad, because teams like Manchester City and Chelsea need to produce young talent. For too many years, they've relied on the transfer market. It's frustrated me as a genuine football fan, because I always think, again, I know I'm linking it back to Manchester United, but when you're producing your own players, there's even more of an affinity towards your club, because you can understand the process that they've been through. You can see that the staff take pride in them, and as I say, with Foden and players like that coming through, it can only be a good thing for football more generally as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Joe, have you been impressed with Foden? Because again, we've seen him over in the past couple of seasons where he's gotten the odd opportunity to come in, but obviously having the likes of David Silva, Bernardo Silva ahead of him has always been very difficult. How different have you seen City with Foden this year? Because in some of those big games we've seen in recent games, he's been a big part of their success and kind of winning over the last kind of 4 or 5 weeks, where they've gone that 13 or 14 games on the bounce without losing.
Well, the difference is with City now and Foden is we were just grateful as football fans if he could get a game at a time. Like Callum said, we're just begging for Man City to give these players a chance. He's gone from that now to actually being probably one of the first names on the team sheet. Is absolutely pivotal now, I think, to what Man City want to do going forward, how they want to play. And I think you touched on a name there, David Silva. Look, it's very hard to come in and replace a player like David Silva, like we found with a lot of our great players over the years when we've lost the likes of Roy Keane, Paul Scholes. You don't necessarily replace those players, but I think Phil Foden's done as good a job as he could have as actually helping fill that void, because I think a lot of people could predict that obviously that would be his long-term future. When David Silva moved on, everybody hoped that he could fill that void to some extent, but I don't think anybody expected him to do it as well as he's done at the moment. But look, he's got everything, hasn't he? He's got skills, he's got the passing ability, he can score goals. I mean, the goal he scored against Liverpool was just so clinical. And David Silva was like that. David Silva was that kind of player that when he got in those positions, you fancied him to score. I don't know what his conversion rate was, but he was very clinical. And this is what he's doing. And I think as good as Phil's been, I think we've got to give some credit to Pep and to some of the players around him. I think Gundogan's also picking up some of those David Silva positions sometimes, and that's helping take the burden off Phil, and it's helping Phil sort of bed into that position a bit more. But I think it's fantastic to see from an England point of view. I mean, you look at it at the moment, people like Phil Foden, Marcus Rashford, Jack Grealish in that England team coming up to the Euros. It's an England team that can finally excite us if, obviously, Gareth can get them in the right position and playing well. And that is the big question. Is Gareth the man to put them in the right position to get them playing well? But yeah, no, going back to Man City, I think Phil Foden's gone from a player that we were all hoping to see and begging for him to get minutes to actually being integral now to the way that City want to play and the way that they want to do it. And I think he's one of the first names on the team sheet.
Absolutely. I guess the last part of kind of this conversation on City, and it's really important, Haider, is actually when we talk about the recruitment for Manchester City in recent years, it hasn't always been the best, but the Ruben Dias signing's been a revelation. He's had the same impact, I would say, that Virgil van Dijk had at Liverpool, and it goes to show just how important defending is in the Premier League, because like Callum said earlier, there's a lot of City fans that are really, really happy with Laporte. They've brought in the likes of Stones. We've seen some of the centre-backs that have come through Manchester City over the last number of years. And really, I think Ruben Dias is the best one after Vincent Kompany. How important has he been in kind of this uptick of form for Manchester City?
It's huge, mate. Look, something I do want to actually add, and I was thinking about it the other day, that Pep Guardiola's never really rebuilt a side. When he's lost the title, he spent 4 years at Barcelona, 3 years at Bayern Munich. He's never actually stayed after not winning the title and then rebuilt the side. So I think when people say, can Pep rebuild? Yes, he's got an absolute embarrassment of rich. He's got an oil state behind him, but he's gone and done that. And he's done that with a strong league. I mean, you look at some of the managers and some of the teams. I don't buy into this idea that the Premier League's weaker. I think it's stronger as a whole. There's teams that any team can beat anyone. So the fact he's done that, and we're sitting here and he's done it without a recognised striker, is amazing. But back in the day, I'm talking 3-4 years ago, there was two central defenders that I wanted United to sign, and that was Aymeric Laporte and Ruben Diaz, two fantastic players. And you do have to wonder sometimes, you know, what the criteria is with our scouting team. You have to wonder because there are two fantastic defenders out there, many, many more. And you're wondering why United haven't looked at players like that. And Callum's saying we bring it back tonight. We're all United fans, so that's why we're comparing. And looking at it now, it's evidently obvious that the impact he's had is massive. And I'll want to break down the impact that he's had on one particular player, and that will be John Stones. Who thought he'd partner John Stones? And this is the thing, you mentioned it the other day, Kieran, and it's absolutely spot on that Aymeric Laporte's a world-class central defender, I think, as well. And so is Ruben Diaz. But actually, putting two top players together doesn't always work. Now, they brought in John Stones, and it's all about partnerships. It's all about understanding. It's all about finding players that work together. John Stones isn't a world-class centre-half, but what Ruben Diaz has done for him has allowed him to elevate his game. Now, I think it's been an inspired signing. I remember we were sitting here, 65 million, really? 60-odd million? Is that really the money that they should be spending for someone relatively unproven? I mean, if you watch Portuguese football, there's Proxima Janada Aaron. You'll know him, actually, Callum. Yeah, really great guy, Aaron. And he's come on the podcast a few times. And he said to me, Ruben Diaz, watch out for him. And he was absolutely right. But defenses are so important. We say this all the time. Manchester United sitting here, 49 goals, top scorers, skewed with the Leeds result probably and the Southampton result, but we're leaking goals. And you're not going to win anything if you're not tight at the back. City can go into each game and pretty much win 1-0 because they know that their defense is solid. And this is the thing that Fergie said it, all the top sides over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, what have they all had? They've all had strong defenses. They've all had the foundations at the back. You build from the back. And that's what Manchester City have done this year. They haven't done that for years. I mean, they used to blow teams away, didn't they? They were scoring a lot of goals. But what they've done now is that they've pretty much, I think they've changed the way that they play. They've tempered it a little bit. So they're not as gung-ho. They're not as attacking. They're not as free-flowing, I don't think. When I watch them, I think this is not the City of 2 years ago, the Centurions. But actually, it's an evolution. They've evolved. Pep Guardiola has actually changed. And I think that's what's impressive. People miss that. They're not the same City we saw, but actually, in some ways, they're better. They're more equipped now to go into Europe and actually go and hold a lead 1-0 away with an away goal. That's what Fergie used to do. That's what the top European sides do. So it's actually frightening because I look at City now. When they were scoring a lot of goals, you thought their attack's great, but there was a bit of a soft spot at the back. There was a weakness there. I don't see that anymore. So for me, it's like, right, so how are teams going to score against them? That's the issue. And that is a great place to be, isn't it? We'd love to go into games and be like, teams thinking, how are we going to score against this United side? And this is the issue right now. So I think they're going to run away with the league. I really do. I'll just check now. They won 5 in a row, and you said they've won 13 odd or whatever it is on the bounce in all competitions. And as a footballing fan, and this is going to be, I'm not happy that City are where they are, but I appreciate good football. I appreciate top tactics, and the City side is a joy to watch. It really is. The evolution has been remarkable, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's a big point, is the whole evolution between different teams. We always mention it with kind of Ferguson, where he was able to change his squad and it was a different title winning team. It wasn't the same nucleus the whole time. One of the key kind of points here, and it was one of the main topics that we were going to talk about today anyway, was the whole idea that what Aaron says here is attack wins you games and defense wins you titles. And it's completely true. And we've seen it throughout, and it's not just in the Premier League. You look at it even in some of the great teams in the Champions League. We've seen it even in some of the main competitions where Joe was mentioning kind of the exciting England team. And then you have to look at some of the others, that the other international teams that have that really good established defense, and they're the ones that tend to make it pretty far. So kind of piggybacking off that, Callum, how important do you think defense has become in a league where we say attacking football is faster and more fluid than we've seen. But if you look at the start of the season, some of the defending in the Premier League was a shambles. So how important do you think it is now that, I guess, number one, that the recruitment is on point when you're looking at the defensive options, but then kind of what Haider says is it's not just getting the top defenders and putting them into your system, that it's actually trying to get the partnerships correct. Because I was reading a story the other day of, it comes back to United, but when they were missing defenders, but this is before Rio Ferdinand and Nemanja Vidic came in, that they were looking at about 4 or 5 different partnerships. I think at one point Gabriel Heinze came in, and I know it was around the time that Piqué was in the youth academy. But how important do you think it is to have those defensive matchups now? We've seen how it's helped both Liverpool and Manchester City. So how important do you think it is for some of the other teams in the Premier League at the moment?
I think finding a defensive partnership is crucial. But I also would say, and you've mentioned City and Liverpool in recent years, it's very, very hard to find, arguably harder to find now than it has been, because you think back to the Premier League maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, you had Terry Devalio, you had Ferdinand and Vidic, you had Hippier and Carragher, even at Liverpool, Daniel Agger as well and Carragher, and you'd some, obviously, Sol Campbell and Keown, and you had an array of really good defensive partnerships, and you don't see that an awful lot, even at the elite level now, because when you look at the current Real Madrid side and the current Barcelona side, would you be saying that you're entirely convinced with their defensive options at the moment? We've clearly got some great names. I mean, Sergio Ramos has been mentioned a lot recently, but age waits for no one in football, no matter how good you are, especially as a defender. So it's definitely a challenge. What I would say in relation to Manchester United is, look at Harry Maguire and think to yourself, if United can get a centre-back that complements him, how good could he be? Because you've mentioned John Stones. Nobody would have predicted John Stones would be a mainstay in the City team at this stage. So I think United need to take inspiration from that and say, and I said this to Phil Brown recently and Beyond the Pitch, Maguire has his deficiencies. He does. I think even he would admit that if he was to speak publicly and he was allowed to speak openly. He knows he doesn't have a lot of recovery pace. That's evident. That's obvious. But he does have good physical attributes. He's very strong in the air. And I always think it's a case of putting together that partnership where the weaknesses of one player are eradicated by the strengths of another. And Ferdinand and Vidic showcased that perfectly. Rio was the confident ball-playing centre-back, whereas Vidic was the physical specimen who would head anything and anywhere. And it would be great if United could get it right and bring someone in to aid Maguire in that. But in terms of partnerships, it is crucial. You look at Liverpool with Van Dijk. A lot of people point to Joe Gomez being out injured as well. But in all honesty, I think Joe Gomez would have... I'm not saying he would have struggled badly, because let's be honest, he is a good footballer, but Matic isn't the level of Van Dijk. He has different attributes. So it's all about getting those partnerships spot on. As I say, though, it is harder than ever, but the recruitment has to be there. And Haider, you made a great point earlier. Manchester United signed Victor Lindelof. Ruben Diaz was at Benfica at that time. Jose Mourinho is supposed to be a man who has his eye on the ball, his finger on the pulse when it comes to Portuguese football. He's obviously Portuguese himself. He's very good contacts in the league, whether that be fellow managers, whether that be his agent, who's also Portuguese. Yet United went for Lindelof instead. So sometimes it's baffling, some of the decisions that can happen even at the top level. Maybe it comes down to price in the end, but yeah, partnerships are always going to be key in football. We might not see them at the top end of the parties two anymore, but you're always going to have that two at the back, because my personal perspective, I know you guys love talking about tactics. I really don't like when you play 3 centre-halves. I feel like that takes something away from a team. And the point I've made about England, and I promise I'm not saying this is a biased Scotsman, is the reason I think England play 3 centre-halves is because they're not confident enough with a 2. Yeah, I think that's why you play Maguire. I think that's why Walker's been brought in there to try and add some pace, and Stones is there as your ball player. But to win titles overall, I don't think you're going to win them with a system with 3 centre backs. So you're spot on. I think the two in a partnership at centre backs always going to be crucial. But the sad caveat, as I've mentioned, is it's incredibly difficult to find. But there are bargains out there. There are players that can add out there. It's just about doing your scouting and doing your homework and hopefully adding to them.
Callum brings up a really good point about these centre backs from the past. I mean, I think it's very, very clear that the quality in centre backs has gone down in terms of defending. What I will also add is that the roles changed. Every manager seems, or most top managers, want to play out the back, and that's a big problem because there's a lot of good pure defenders out there, but people won't sign them because of the fact that they're not as adept at passing out from the back. So I think it makes it really difficult for a manager who's looking to plug that gap at the back, because you're looking at it and you're thinking, right, so before it was a criteria of can they defend, can they tackle, can they header, can they do all the basics well, are they quick? Now you're saying, can they pass? Have they got good awareness? Is their positional sense good? Can they start attacks? Can they play long balls? It's all these separate criteria that are coming in. I actually feel sorry for centre-backs coming through, and that's why I think they're worse defenders, because a lot of managers are thinking, right, okay, well, especially the ones that like possession. You look at Pep Guardiola, what does he say? If making tackles means, what does he say? Making tackles, I don't like doing tackles. And Maldini said, if you make tackles, it's a mistake. I think that's the one. But when you look at what managers are thinking, I think Guardiola would take someone who's a top ball player over someone that's a top defender, pure defender. You think Vidic is probably one of the best defenders I've seen. I think he was one of the greatest that's ever graced the Premier League, but he wouldn't walk into a Pep Guardiola side. Doesn't mean he's a bad player, but the criteria have changed and it's difficult. And it's clear as well, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wants to play out from the back. Rightly or wrongly, that's what he wants to do. I think you're looking at it, Lindelof's good on the ball. Maguire can step into midfield well. He can play some nice cross-field passes as well. But as Callum said, the lack of pace, doesn't matter how good you are on the ball. If you're slow, and it's not even just his pace, it's he hasn't really got the agility to move. It's just very slow and a bit cumbersome. And I think it's a real issue for Man United. But what City have got is they've got someone like Diaz, who is the full package. You can see him. He's physical. He goes hard into tackles. Lovely passer of the ball. I mean, he's just everything you want in a modern centre back. And as things stand right now, obviously with Van Dijk injured, there's not a better centre back in the Premier League and possibly in Europe.
Yeah, can I just say as well, coming in, especially on the Lindelof thing that you mentioned there, Callum, I think if I remember rightly, when Lindelof came to the club, I think there was a massive outcry, especially from United fans, that we needed this ball-playing centre-back, didn't we? Because we'd had people like Phil Jones and Chris Smalling who were obviously very sort of physical, and we were thinking it'd be nice to have a ball-playing centre-back to sort of complement it. And I think Jose went with that. And that's probably why he went for Lindelof, because that's the only reason you can think. Obviously, Callum, we look at Ruben Diaz now, and like you say, he was at Benfica at the same time. And I'm not saying that Ruben Diaz is not good on the ball. I'd probably have to see more of him, but I think Ruben Diaz's biggest MO is being physical and sort of demanding, and sort of commanding that back line, isn't it? So I think that's the only excuse I can give Jose and United scouting team.
I've got a question for you, genuinely, because I might be in the minority here. Yeah, the boys will know this, but Callum, I'm not a massive fan of Maguire. I think there's too many flaws in his game. But I think Lindelof's a fantastic footballer. I don't think he's physical. Actually, I'll pass it to you, Callum. But do you think that if you put Lindelof in a Pep Guardiola side, let's say next to Diaz, he'd look like an absolutely fantastic centre-back? He'd be brilliant in the side where he's asked to start the attacks, when he's asked to step into midfield. He reads the game very well. That's why Solskjaer chooses him. Can United win the league with him and Maguire? Absolutely not. They're not good enough as a partnership. But if you're talking about the modern centre-back, which is what the criteria that has changed, surely Lindelof maybe fits it better than Maguire does.
Well, I think you're right with that, and particularly with the comparison to a Pep Guardiola side. One of the points I made at the time when United signed Maguire, and I didn't mean it to be as disparaging as it sounded. I said to a few friends of mine, United needed a character like Maguire. They certainly did. He was a leader. He was someone who at the time you thought he's the sort of character, as I say, that will boost that squad. But I remember saying to friends at the time, as much as you need that character, you don't pay £80 million for a character. You pay £80 million for a bona fide superstar, I would say, in their position. I know inflation now, you might say that's 140 or whatever it might be now, but at the time when he joined United, it was a world record fee. So you think to yourself, you have to be signing someone who is going to deliver more than just that leadership and organisation. I think the reason Maguire will be the guy who has to be complimented is simply due to that price tag. I think if Manchester United were, as you say, to put Maguire aside and bring someone in to complement Lindelof like a Diaz, I think, yes, it would be good for the team as a whole, but I don't think reputationally the club can take that gamble at this moment, because Maguire's only in his second season. It'll be approaching his third soon, and I think it's one of those ones where they have to give him the best possible chance. When you consider he's wearing the captain's armband, he is someone who plays regularly for England. And if you were being brutally honest, would you like to see a Diaz type come in and maybe complement a Lindelof or a Bailly if he could get fit? Absolutely, but it's just easier said than done. But totally agree with you on the point that Lindelof would definitely complement a Guardiola side much more than Maguire. I mean, those links at the time were that Maguire was going to maybe go to City, and it's terrible to say this, but I think when you look at it, Pep will be delighted that he ultimately didn't get him, because if he went to City, he could be on the bench like Laporte is at the moment, because I don't think Guardiola's scared to cast someone aside if he's not happy with them.
Yeah,
sorry, I was just going to say.
Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, from a United perspective. Sorry, I have my lag again. I just think it's important this summer to sort of strike while the iron's hot. We talk about that there's not a lot of great centre backs out there. Actually, this summer is probably the best chance for United, because Pep's got his centre backs now. I know he probably would like to add another one, but he'll be happy with what he's got back there right now. And this summer, there's some that are becoming available. We know Koundé's got a release clause there that Sevilla are expecting to be triggered. We've heard that Varane might be available for something around 50 million. We know Sergio Ramos even is another option. I can't remember a summer where all these, what we would consider as top-class centre-backs, are all going to come available probably around the same time. We know about Upamecano too, although we don't seem to be linked with him anymore. But again, we know his release clause. He's going to be available. Canate, another one at Leipzig. It's tough to remember a summer where United are going to have such a pool of talent to actually go and pluck somebody this summer and make that improvement now, because if they leave it, some of these defenders are going to move this year and there'll never be another opportunity to get them again. So I think it's really crucial that, first of all, United acknowledge that it is a position that they need to strengthen, which I'm hoping that they are, because when you listen to Ollie, sometimes he does worry me. He seems to be quite happy with that defence, but I hope he is seeing that he doesn't need another one. And then, once they do that, let's hope they go and get the one that they want.
You mentioned Varane, and Phil Brown on Beyond the Pitch has been very open recently on the shows I've been on with him. He expects United to go for Varane this summer. He's just changed agents, so he's now represented by an agency based in the UK, which is an interesting move at this stage of his career. Base Soccer, I believe the agency is. We might be reading too much into that, of course, you never know. But if he was available, Joe, I think he is the sort of player United would go for. Ed Woodward in the past has been not so subtle in saying that he's a player that they'd be willing to pay. I think it was 100 million was the quote a few years ago. So I think he's the sort of player that United would consider. But again, as you say, if you sign Varane, is he the perfect complementary option for Maguire? Or
I think he is.
It's hard.
Yeah, I think he is.
So I was just going to ask, but I was going to ask that, Callum, because actually, I'll be honest with you, and I'm not discrediting anybody who rates Varane or whatever, but there's been a few times I've seen Varane when he's not played alongside, say, Sergio Ramos, and I've got to be honest with you, I've been less than convinced. I think City away in the Champions League, did he play alongside Militao in that game? I think, but he had an awful game, and City weren't at full strength. I think they might have even played a false nine in that game, but he really did struggle. And I've seen a few examples of him in Europe and in La Liga. When he's not next to Ramos, he doesn't quite look the same player. And the problem is he's not exactly going to come to Man United and play alongside a defender that's absolutely confident either, is he? So it's not like Maguire's going to be able to carry Varane through, because Maguire's actually looking for somebody to help him get through it. It's a really tricky situation. In fact, you look at someone like Sergio Ramos and you think, ideal for this defence. He's going to come in there. He's not only going to play well, but the demand he's going to put on these players to improve is going to be massive. But then you look at Ramos's age and you look at his pace now at his age. Like you say, he can't beat Father Time. He's done a lot in his career, but that's one battle he's not going to win. And I just think Maguire, we've always said, haven't we, Haider, on our shows, we feel like he needs a pacey, athletic, powerful defender next to him. I mean, and we've always said Upamecano seems to be, when you're looking at all the attributes, seems to be the one. But United just look so far away from that deal at the moment that it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So it just makes you wonder, like Haider said earlier in the show, what profile of defender do United think that they need? Because it seems to be different to what we think they want as fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that comes down to the recruitment, because look, there's going to be a lot of centre backs moved on this summer. We already know that Upamecano is probably off to Bayern Munich. There's going to be a lot of movement in Spain. The reason why Varane or Sergio Ramos is even a possibility is because of the financial situation at Real Madrid. That they have to get some of the wages off if they want to try and improve the side. And I don't think it's not really that quiet anymore that they want to try and bring in Pau Torres, because that's been reported for the past 6 or 7 months over there. And again, that's another player that United have been interested in. But yeah, I think Varane, if he is available, I'd say it's a very likely transfer that could happen, because one, Edo Woodward he's always been interested in trying to bring Varane to the club. And when Varane first went to Madrid, United were in for him at that point in time as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if he did go, especially if it's for a lower fee than what they would have expected to pay. And that's what it seems like it's going to be, that Varane wants to leave, that Madrid are prepared to kind of let him go if they can sign, especially if they can sign Ramos to a new deal, because they know that at least they can get a transfer fee for Rafael Varane, which they can't get for Sergio Ramos because at the end of his contract. Again, this, for me, it always comes back to recruitment, because we talk about this in terms of the top teams, that yes, Liverpool, Man City have been able to fix it, but how many times have we seen some of the top teams bring in these big, high-profile centre-backs and it hasn't worked? It's happened numerous amounts of times over the past few seasons. And I guess the one team that I keep looking towards, and it was actually mentioned on Sky Sports recently, was Leicester City.
I was just about to say that.
you look at the
Amazing.
way that it's not even just their centre backs. You look at Pereira, who's on right back. They had Chilwell initially, goes to Chelsea. They've now brought in Castagna, who's been one of the better wing backs. Like, I know he got injured early on the season, but he came out of the breaks really quick for Leicester. And you look at Fofana, who looks like an excellent player. And the thing is, I think the way that they're scouting defenders and the way they're bringing in is what you want from your team, that you don't have to be spending this huge amount of money on a centre-back to have them come in and to be successful. Like what I just mentioned earlier, where United were interested in Varane when he was leaving France initially, but Madrid were able to get those transfers over the line. I don't see United do that as much. I know they brought in someone in the youth academy from France this season. I think he's 17, and like, that's the idea, but you haven't really seen it as much, where they haven't really recognized a centre half that at that time they're not ready to be the full-time starter, but within 2 to 3 seasons they should be. And that's what I see in Leicester a lot, because you saw Fofana come in and we weren't really sure if he was going to be able to hit the ground running, but now you look at him and he's composed, he's an athletic centre-back, he's confident, and that's really the style of centre-back that I think you need beside a Harry Maguire. And it's why it works for Leicester, because they have those differing kind of abilities in their defensive partnership. the problem is, and I completely agree in some context about Varane, is he the best partner for Maguire? He probably isn't. He's probably more of a replacement if you're bringing him in for Maguire and have someone beside him, and that's probably the biggest issue. I guess because you said you were going to mention it as well, Haider, is how impressed have you been with kind of the recruitment style from Leicester? Because it's defensively, it's probably been the best in the Premier League.
I know Callum's got a point he wants to make. I'll let him jump in and then I'll go.
The quick point I wanted to make in reference to Varane, and it's just an alarm bell that rings for me whenever Real Madrid are getting rid of a player. Look at Gareth Bale and Tottenham this season, and look at some of the players Madrid have let go in the past, even Khedira when they moved him on. When Madrid are willing to let a player go, I always have that slight worry that there's a reason they're letting them go. Bayern Munich are the same. Look at Schweinsteiger when he arrived at United. They were relatively happy to say, oh, we'll take under 10 million and on you go. And that should have had alarm bells ringing at the time for United because, as you know, guys, unless players are out of contract like Toni Kroos or David Alaba, Bayern very rarely let a top star go. Real Madrid are the same. Financially or not, Real Madrid have got so many squad options that I think they could sell and raise a bit of cash if they had to. They could even loan a player or two out like they did with James Rodriguez in the past if they had to save in wages. So if they're willing to move Varane on as easily as has been rumoured, I would just be slightly apprehensive about that because they are a club that very rarely do that. And the other second quick point before I let you come back in, Haider, it's just on Leicester. I think it's important that clubs, as you've rightly said, Kieran, look out with the obvious sides and the obvious markets because there's a lot of talent out there. One of the defenders I would mention in that, I'm not saying he would be good enough for United at this moment, is Sven Botman. He was an Ajax player. He wasn't playing in the Ajax side. He went on loan to Heerenveen and he was playing really well there and gets his move to Lille and now is linked with a move to top clubs across Europe. So if you're scouting properly the way Leicester appears to be, there could be a centre-half out there who we haven't discussed in this show who could be tailor-made for United. It's just about finding that player. And as we always say, easier said than done, but they are there. Look at Mahrez and players in the past, Kante, that Leicester have found also. They just seem to have a knack for it. So if we can go and get some of them in, the recruitment staff, then it would be a delight to help us out.
Yeah, Callum's absolutely spot on. Kieran, I'm very wax lyrical about Leicester City. Always am. I'll tell you why, because we discussed this many times, and I know Phil said it several times on his own podcast. But the sort of United have had 7 or 8 years of really, really bad recruitment decisions. They've wasted. People. I'll never be one of those that say the Glazers haven't spent. I know we can go into it forever. It's not their money, etc., but that's not the point. Still, over 1 billion has been spent poorly. And what have United got to show for it? And we talk about, I know I've had Kieran Maguire on, and I know Callum works with Kieran, and Kieran's fantastic. And you remember in the summer, Kieran, when Kieran came on, the other Kieran, and he said that United are struggling with these legacy dealings. The amount of money that's been spent, and now with the pandemic, and you have 110 million wiped off your match day revenue is a huge amount for any club. If Man United are struggling, what are the other clubs? As you say, Real Madrid are struggling, absolute world powerhouses. And this is a problem. I think United are starting to turn a corner, but it's still not there. And we talk about Leicester City and we talk about Liverpool. And the story I always tell is, and you know this one, about how Julian Brandt was the number one choice and he chose Dortmund. And the data analytics said that the most similar player to Brandt was Mo Salah. Now, Klopp didn't want Salah, but the recruitment team and analytics all said that Salah was the man to get. He came in and his numbers are absolutely phenomenal. He probably doesn't get the respect he deserves. Unfortunately, he plays for the lot, the red side of Merseyside, but he's an absolute, he will leave the Premier League genuinely as one of the best wingers, or you say wingers, inside forwards that we've seen. And I think this is a point that United are 4 or 5 years behind the Liverpools, the Leicesters, the Man Cities of the world. And now we're starting to use the data, we're starting to use analytics, we're growing our team, but it's still going to take a bit of time. I don't think we're there yet. And I think another thing to add as well is that Leicester did the impossible. the absolute impossible and won the league. And a lot of teams have got to the summit and they've just gone. Leicester haven't done that. They dipped a bit and they brought in an absolutely fantastic manager, Brendan Rodgers. I mean, arguably one of the top 5 managers in the league, I'd say. Maybe top 3, genuinely. If you're going to say Jurgen Klopp, Pep Guardiola, I think you're maybe putting Rodgers in at 3rd as it stands currently. I think he's that good. He's went and he really developed his management and his skills at Celtic. And it's such an important time in his career. And I'd say, someone like Eddie Howe should go to Celtic and do that. But the fact is that they didn't let it just get to their heads. They carried on building, and now they've got consistency. They're a top 6 side without a shadow of a doubt. I think that's the most impressive thing. There's a lot of factors why Leicester are where they are. Recruitment team, but they've got owners that really do care. They have bought into the city. They're bought into. I mean, they're such a huge part of Leicester. I mean, you talk to anyone. I've had a few Leicester fans on my podcast, and they talk about how much the Vichai and his family have ploughed into the city, hospitals and great causes. This is what it's about. The connection between the fans, the club, the owner. It's unbreakable. Genuinely unbreakable. And we don't have that. And that's a really, really big factor. Money's been spent poorly. But I look for Fofana, and I'd seen a bit of Fofana. I thought this guy's a good player. And when I saw him go to Leicester, I'm like, he's going to be an £80 million player in a couple of years' time. Like, I could see that. Because why? Because Leicester's track record is so good. And arguably, look at their size. Tielemans, you always bang on about him, Kieran, but Tielemans is a fantastic player. Everyone knew about Tielemans at Monaco, before Monaco. So Anderlecht went to Monaco, his career stalled. Everyone knew about Tielemans. Even the kids that play FIFA know about Tielemans. He's the sort of player that United should have been looking at. And you do question, they signed Tielemans, and you're looking at the players that we've signed over the years, and you're thinking, this isn't right. What's going on here? This is Manchester United. And I think there is the element that when United do come in, even for the smaller players, the price does go up. But we've got to be better with the way that we do our dealings. We've got to be smarter. We don't need to go and buy the Varans of the world. We don't need to even go and buy, the Ramoses of the world, as Callum said. We just need to go and buy the players that we feel we can develop. But that also comes with the long-term plan of the club. I think, with all the negativity that sometimes comes with Solskjaer, there actually is a long-term vision here. So you'd hope that, and we're only 3 years into it, so you'd hope that, the plan of the next 3 to 5 years are a little bit more concrete than when you're going from LVG to Jose and so on. So you'd like to hope that now we'll start implementing the similar sort of things. But what does puzzle me is, I actually agree with, I think you mentioned it, Kieran, it might have been Joe. I don't know if United are really that desperate to sign a centre-back. I think they're interested, but it doesn't seem like... I do think Ollie's happy with what he's got. He's got immense faith in certain players. I also look at the defensive midfielder position and think you need to do something there, because bringing in someone of real quality will make the centre-backs also look better. You've got to fix the spine of the team, and United have Bruno Fernandes. I think they've got issues at goalkeeper. The spine's not there. They've got an issue at centre-back, and they've probably got an issue at striker. Cavani's been fantastic. I mean, he's a proper number 9, but he's 33 years old. He's not one for the future. Maybe it's Mason. So when you break these things down, you consider where United are in the league. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And then you look at a club like Leicester and you think that's how it should be run. So I'm really impressed with what I see from Leicester. They deserve all the success, and they've set themselves up for longevity, and that's the key.
Yeah, I think one of the key points there that you made was the idea of having that spine of the team, because I go back to even Leicester last season, how impressive they were up until then. Obviously lockdown happened and they kind of lost their way. I know there was injuries, a lot of suspensions, and they kind of fell apart after that. But again, you mentioned the defensive midfield, you mentioned the kind of centre-back partnership, and it's all that defensive scheme that the team have together. And look, when we look at it for this season in the top 4, I think it's closer than ever, and defensive lapses are going to be the ones that will cost the team from making it in the top 4 and out of it. What you said, Haider, is actually pretty remarkable in what Solskjaer has been able to do, considering is we look at that defense and how they performed, and the fact that they're still they're still up there, and when you look at the other teams that are behind them and you try to project over the next few months, you would expect United to be able to comfortably be in that top four. But then I guess you have to. The one question I have, because Chelsea over the last few weeks have been playing quite well under Thomas Tuchel. Now he has a completely different system than, especially defensively, than what we saw under Frank Lampard. So I'll go to you on this one, Joe. In terms of the top four race, we saw Leicester fall apart last season. We've seen the likes of West Ham have played really well. Liverpool have faltered a lot this season, but they're still in there. They're still kind of not too far off the likes of United. What do you expect? Do you think that the top four we currently see now, in terms of City, United, Liverpool, and probably Leicester, are what we'll look at towards the end of the season? Or do you think there's going to be a big change over the next couple of months?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, it's such an unpredictable season. I've made a lot of predictions this season, I feel, and then a week after, or even a week after, I've had to change it. It's just so hard to call, isn't it? I mean, you know, you look at Liverpool at the moment, and it's in one half of your brain, it's inconceivable that they won't be top four, but then in the other half of your brain, it's very conceivable that they won't be top four because, you know, I find it strange. Klopp brought in 2 centre-backs in January, and I think they've even struggled to make the bench. He's still, you know, playing Jordan Henderson. I'm not quite sure what he's doing there at the moment. I know one of those games was obviously Man City. You wouldn't thrust a £1.5 million defender in for that game, and you probably wouldn't bring in a sort of a loan signing in Quebec in for that game. But they played Brighton the game before at home. And you're thinking, surely one of those new boys had to play, see how they do. And if they do all right, then they're ready to play against Man City, aren't they? But, you know, it's difficult to see because at the moment, on current form, if I'm honest, the only team I do see dropping out of that four is Liverpool. You know, because I don't see Leicester making the same mistakes that they made last year. I might be wrong. You know, it remains to be seen. It's quite strange to think what Leicester did last season, really, because you don't really associate them with a team that would burn out towards the end of the season because they don't exactly. They play a good intensity of game, but they don't play like a Liverpool kind of game where it's 100 miles an hour, not even like Southampton. So it's a bit strange why Leicester did sort of tail off. They did get some injuries, I think, towards the end of the season, which was key for them. But actually, I think their squad's better now, so I don't think that's going to be an issue for them. With West Ham, I just think they're so heavily reliant on scoring a certain type of goal. You know, I think the key for West Ham this year has been set pieces, and there's been obviously Souček scoring goals the way he scores goals. If that avenue sort of goes, then maybe that they struggle a little bit. So I don't think they can maintain. The interesting one for me is Everton. I've been really impressed over the season with Everton, but especially over the last few weeks because we saw classic Everton. They've often made good starts like this to a season, and then they dipped off, and everybody thought it's going to be a typical Everton season. But what they've done differently this year is that they've managed to rediscover that form back again, so that dip sort of gone away, and they've come back again now. And I think that's down to the personnel that they've got in the likes of James Rodriguez coming in. You know, he's a great player. If he's going to have a game off, it's only going to be a game or two, and then he's going to be back. You know, Dominic Calvert-Lewin the same. He's never going to go many games without a goal. Richarlison the same, pretty consistent. And in Ancelotti, they have a coach that knows exactly what he's doing, and especially the Premier League as well. Don't forget, this guy's won a Premier League. So he knows what it means. He knows how to play a 38-game season in the Premier League. So they're the ones, I think if there was to be a change in the top four to how it currently is, I think Everton are the one that I would say could make that late run, just because I think they've got the personnel and experience both in their playing staff and their coaching staff to be able to do that. But it's strange to think that at the moment, the only first team I can see out that top four is Liverpool. Because look, we know what this United team's like. I suppose, dare I say it, we could get the yips and we could struggle. But you'd like to think that we have built up a nice little buffer there, if you know what I mean, in terms of the team in fifth, who is like the Everton. It's changing every Chelsea, I think, at the moment. See, Chelsea are another under Thomas Tuchel. The only thing I'm hesitant to mention Chelsea for is actually Tuchel's run of games this has been quite friendly. I think, you know, he's going to have some tougher battles down the road. I think he's going to get some harder games toward the end of the season. So we can only judge Chelsea then, because when they play the tougher sides, they'll be the ones that they'll need to win if they want to get in the top four. I think they play Liverpool away in a few weeks. I mean, that's going to be a massive game to see if Chelsea can be that team to come into the top four, or whether Liverpool can maintain a position. But I don't see. Yeah, it's a tough one. But like I say, if I was going to make a change, it'd probably be Everton will come into that top four. But it'd be for Liverpool, man. I just can't get my head around that. So I don't know, mate. I'm sorry, I'm probably waffling on a bit here now. I'm just confusing myself because it's one of them seasons. I don't know where it's going, mate. I just don't know where it's going.
I don't think anybody knows where this season's going. Like, it seems like every single time we turn, there's another game that's on, and it's like, it's kind of tiring when you, especially, look, we do quite a lot of podcasts during the week, and trying to remember even every game that's happened from one week to the next is a struggle, because I know from our show from last week on Red Devils Talk to this week, I think United played 2 or 3 times since then. So we see that a lot now. In terms of this kind of top four race, and it's an interesting point that Joe makes around Liverpool, because I kind of mentioned it last week that in context, it's been one of the weaker kind of title defenses that we've seen, because the way Liverpool have played, it doesn't look like the Liverpool of the last 2 years. So, Callum, in terms of looking at kind of this top four, because I think when you're looking at it now, City are kind of odds-on favourite to win the Premier League by how they're playing. So you look at the next kind of 4 or 5 teams after that. Is there any surprises that you could see from now until the end of the season? Because I think at this point last year, nobody expected United to come back and get into the top four. Could you see a team like Chelsea, or like Joe mentions, Everton, or even can West Ham keep up what they're doing? Because they've been really impressive this year as well. Or do you expect it to pretty much be where Leicester, United and Liverpool can get some sort of consistency and kind of remain in those top 4 places?
I think if I had to put my money where my mouth is, then I think I would back the top 4 as it stands to stay the same. I think Liverpool, on paper, let's be honest, should have enough to at least finish in the top 4. If their front 3 gets going, then they'll have no problem staying in the top 4. That has been an issue, as you know, as of late. So I think the big thing that's going to be interesting for me is the consistency of Chelsea and Everton. Those two, I totally agree with Joe, are most likely to challenge for the top 4. I'm going to be brutally honest in my opinion of Chelsea. I think you're going to see a marked difference because they now have an elite coach. I respect Frank Lampard. I think he's an outstanding character within English football. He is someone who I hope goes on to be a top manager. But if you look even at his coaching staff, there was Lampard, there was Jody Morris. I know Anthony Barry's highly rated as well, but I just don't think a team like Chelsea should be relying on a staff like that at this stage. I mean, people can say the same about Solskjaer, but he's got Mike Phelan alongside him, who has been there, done it, wore the T-shirt time after time after time. Whether that be academy coaching, whether that be in first team coaching, and whether that be being the assistant, of course, to Sir Alex Ferguson. So I think with Thomas Tuchel, you will see a marked difference in Chelsea. The big pressure on Tuchel is to get the best out of Havertz and Werner, which Frank was unable to do. But as much as I'm saying that about Frank, I think the players have to look at themselves as well. And Werner, to be fair, has worked his socks off, and he's probably been unlucky not to have a bigger impact in regards to goals. Havertz has more to do for me. A lot of people describe him as a generational talent, and I'm sure he will go on to prove that. And as a football fanatic, like Haider said earlier, I would love to see it happen because I love seeing attractive football and the very best players succeed. So I wish him all the best, but it's just not happened for him at the moment, and I'll be interested to see if Tuchel can change that. In terms of Everton, I've been very impressed with them this season. I've got a personal friend who's an Everton fan. He was working down in Liverpool last year, and at the start of the season, his famous last words were, "I feel for Ancelotti, he'll go nowhere with Calvert-Lewin up front." So every single week, I just remind him about that comment and how wrong he was. He described him as a workman-like centre forward when he watched him live, but
I
he
said the
didn't
same
ever
thing,
see
Callum.
him. He didn't
Yeah.
expect him to go on to score maybe 20, 25 Premier League goals. And to be fair, at the time, I think I agreed with him. I thought, right, fair enough. I'll take your viewpoint, and that's maybe a fair reflection. But he's been outstanding this season. You look at the stubbornness there. They've got the Corey, who I really liked when he was at Watford. They've got Alan, who just mops up all the danger. He's not the flashiest footballer in the world, but I think guys like that are important. Like a Matic of, say, 5 years ago. I think Matic, when he was at Chelsea in that title-winning season under Mourinho, he mopped everything up. He got the ball and he moved it on to the better players in the team. He chipped in with a fair few goals as well because he has got that potential, but he knew his role in the team. For me, that's what Alan delivers. You think of Rodriguez and the creativity he's got. Richarlison, for me, he's not been as consistent, I think, as the Everton fans would want, but on his day, he's one of the best players in the league by far. And talking about defences, I think Everton's defence is also pretty decent. I think in Digne, you've got someone who's very good at both sides of the game. Creatively, he's very strong, but I think he can defend as well. We all know what Seamus Coleman can do. He's a very proven player. I know he's getting on a wee bit, but we know what he can do. Glad to see Michael Keane doing well again because he's a centre-half who I like. The only thing that will let Everton down is the goalkeeping situation, because I don't mean this in any disrespect to Robin Olsen, but he looks like a carbon copy of Jordan Pickford. He looks nervous. He looks erratic.
The Serie A Pickford, yeah.
Yeah, he looks like a goalkeeper who relies on confidence, and Pickford's the sort of guy, he puffs the chest out, and he's got the swagger about him when he's on form. And when he's on form, he is a good goalkeeper, but there's too many errors in his game. And so far from what I've watched, Olsen's the same. A cross might come in and he'll kind of half come for it, but half want to stay on his line and he'll get caught. And I think that's what will let Ancelotti down in the end. I think if Everton do get top four or they get close to it, they need to go out and get a top goalkeeper. You guys may disagree with me on Pickford, but I don't think he's England's strongest goalkeeper. I have Nick Pope ahead of him. I would say Dean Henderson's ahead of him as well,
agreed.
if I'm honest. So as I say, Chelsea and Everton would be the two most likely teams. I have to hold my hands up. I slagged one of my friends for his Calvert-Lewin comment. I have to hold mine up and say I got it wrong on David Moyes. I was asked at the start of the season how I thought West Ham would get on, and I said probably between 12th and 15th. Unspectacular. He'll keep them up, and I think they'll move them on at the end of the season. I got it wrong. Souček has been the signing Moyes has craved for years. He's found his new Fellaini, and fair play to the lad. He's been fantastic, and good on David Moyes, because at United he was very poor. He took Sunderland down. His reputation took a big hit, and it must have been hard for him to deal with that when you consider what he built at Everton, and he got the United job. So fair play to him for rebuilding his reputation and being at a stage now where a lot of West Ham fans want him to get a new contract, which if you asked me at the start of the season, I would never have pictured or predicted that. So I think, as I say, Chelsea and Everton for me are the most likely to break in, but I just wanted to credit West Ham and that I got it completely wrong. I thought David Moyes would be unspectacular, but the season they've had has been nothing short of fantastic, and good on them. One thing, sorry, it just came to my mind. I don't know how they got on in the the FA Cup. They're not going to win, actually now. But I heard on TalkSport somebody saying that West Ham fans would rather finish fifth than win the FA Cup, and I just found that baffling, because surely by winning the FA Cup you get into Europe and you would win the trophy. So that was just another thing that came to mind. Obviously they won't do that this season. But it was just a point that came to my mind. But as I say, Chelsea and Everton most likely.
Yeah, the West Ham one is a really interesting one, because I think I would have agreed with you that if you asked who would be a candidate for one of the first managers that would have got sacked this season, I think a lot of people's choice would have been David Moyes, because I know even just watching kind of some of the West Ham fans towards the end of last season, that they said that they performed better when David Moyes wasn't actually on the sideline, which is...
Kieran, you just have to add what Jim said. Jim Salverson, big West Ham fan, was like, I think we're going to get relegated this season at the beginning of the season. Their own fans thought it.
Like that, but that's the thing. And then I think Callum brings up the main comment about West Ham is that they brought in Souček and they haven't looked back since. The one thing you can actually say again with West Ham in the past, like probably 18 months, is their recruitment has been good. And it kind of goes back to kind of the main topic of the show today, that recruitment is really important so that not only does the player that you bring in fit the way you want to play, but it actually makes sense going into the future. I know that we had a big conversation yesterday on the podcast, Haider, about United doing that with Donny van de Beek, and I don't really want to go into like individual players, but just as kind of a way recruitment needs to work. How important do you think that style of play with the people you're bringing in that you're recruiting is important? Because, like I said, we spoke about Donny van de Beek yesterday, and how on the surface it looks like a good transfer. You look at Kai Havertz with Chelsea, on the surface it looks like a good transfer. Both have come in, and while Havertz has played more, neither one of them really look like they're fitting into the current systems that are at their clubs when they both were expected to come in and play. We see this pretty much every season with different players. We just spoke about the defence with Manchester City, how Ruben Diaz and Stones works in the Manchester City defensive system, but it doesn't work with Aymeric Laporte, which is, again, it's quite shocking. But again, it goes to show just how important systems are. And I know that kind of the second part of this is because we end up having to talk about this quite a lot, is when we talk about systems, it's not so much as saying, well, these managers use this formation, so this player should fit into this team because it fits into this team. It's because we had a lot of comments about that yesterday, that, well, if 2 or 3 different teams play 4-3-3, why doesn't a player fit in one system and fits into another?
Oh, I think yesterday's podcast was really, really good, because I think, and we've had some great feedback about it, because a lot of fans had the opportunity to project their views. And I think one of the biggest problems is that there are a lot of big accounts, especially in the United fan base, who push certain narratives. And, you know, it's like when mainstream media, you know, the big newspapers say one thing, and, you know, most people watch it or listen to it so they believe what's been said. I think it's a massive case when it comes to Donny van de Beek. One of the biggest things I think this transfer window has shown people, and we always knew this, it's all about, you don't just buy 11 of the best players in the world and put them into a team. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, you can think about the best front 3 in the world, you can think about the 3 best players, and doesn't mean they'll work together, because that's not how football works. You know, we spoke about Varane, didn't we? We said when Varane came to Manchester United, absolutely incredible player. So talented, but it didn't work. You think about Gerrard, Scholes, and Lampard. It probably could have worked if Sven was a little bit more, if he used his brain a little bit more and played 4-3-3. But the point remains is that there was always an age-old debate. Gerrard and Lampard, 2 fantastic players. Can they play together? Didn't look like it, but that's not because, and that's what I'm saying, you put all these players in together, fantastic players in England's golden age, didn't win anything. So the thing about Donny van de Beek, and we've said it so many times, is that, like you said, on the surface, fantastic signing. I don't think any team would have passed up on 40 million for Donny van de Beek. I really don't. I think it was United conducted business very quickly, very swiftly. I'm sure Edwin van der Sar helped a lot in that respect, but on the surface, it was a fantastic signing, and you got to commend the club for how quickly they got it done. Now, he's come to the Premier League, and we always say you've got to settle in. You know, it's got to take time. And that's something, perhaps I was a little bit impatient in October, and I turned around and said, yes, Ole okayed him, but I'm not sure he really was the player Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wanted. We all know Jack Grealish was the number 1 target. And this is another thing as well. Fans say, oh, okay, well, Grealish is a fantastic player, really fantastic player. I want him instead of Sancho. No, United need a right winger, a player that plays that role. No, we can put Grealish on the right. No, but this is the problem. Manchester United for years have put square pegs in round holes. And why is Guardiola so successful? Why Leicester so successful right now? Why is Jurgen Klopp been so successful? Because they bought the players that Klopp's turned around and said, I need this player because this is a specific role that he's going to fulfill in the system. It's not about individuals. It's about a system. Why is Jurgen Klopp, why Liverpool so good? I look at their team and I think, are their players much better than Man United's? In certain positions, yes, absolutely. But Robertson, did anyone think Robertson's going to become the best fullback in the world? Did anyone think that? No. He came at 8 million and people were laughing, oh, Liverpool are buying a poor
Callum
player
would
like
have.
that.
He's Scottish, so Callum would have answered. Yeah. Ask Callum that question, mate. I bet he would have.
A lot of stick this week because I was asked about best left backs in the Premier League, and in my opinion, it's Kieran Tierney, and everyone said, is Billy Connolly your favourite striker, and is Kevin Bridges your favourite central midfielder?
I love that.
I refuse to comment on Scottish players.
Ollie Byrne is easily the best centre forward in the league, isn't he, at the moment as well? Any of them, you can pick any of them you want, can't you? The best centre forward in the league.
That's so true.
So I'm assuming Scott McTominay is the player of the season.
It must be. This is a thing though. Like everyone laughed at that. You looked at Mo Salah, hardly pulled up trees. Sadio Mane, I mean, he was a good player at Southampton. I don't think anyone saw what he would do. And this is the point. If you give the managers what they wanted, I mean, I'm pretty sure LVG wanted Mane, he wanted Mahrez. You know, there were players that he wanted. And when I look at Donny van der Beek, I don't see what fans see, honestly, when he plays. And they seem to think, right, okay, so just move to a 4-3-3, just get a defensive midfielder and he can play as a number 8. But you're then pulling Bruno Fernandes further back, and the system's built around Bruno Fernandes to flourish, to be the attacking creative force, to be the main man. Someone said to me today under one of our videos, he said, oh, well, why don't we try... Because Pochettino played Eriksen on the right, as a creator on the right. So why don't we play Bruno out on the right and get teams at part of the bus and put Van der Beek? I'm like, because Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is not Pochettino. And Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's 4-2-3-1 is different to Pochettino's 4-2-3-1. Jurgen Klopp's 4-3-3 is different to Pep Guardiola's. When Guardiola plays 4-3-3, he's not going to go and ask for the same players as Jurgen Klopp. You know what I'm trying to say? So system's so important. Donny van der Beek came, played 6 and 8 at times at Ajax, played in a team that dominated possession, played in a team where he's grown up with the players, the understanding, the telepathy is there, the dominated territory, the one-touch football. They play at more of I'm going to say slower pace. I'm not downgrading the Dutch league, but it's Premier League is very much, the intensity is that goes up and down. You come to Manchester United and you cannot play number 6 or number 8 at Manchester United in the Premier League. It's just not physically possible. And especially in the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer team, it's very clear that Ole's demands from especially the 2 in the double pivot, it's a physical task. And that Paul Pogba at times hasn't done it. It's a physical task. I would even liken it to actually, not saying we place him away to Jose Mourinho, but Jose Mourinho wants the midfielders to work hard in midfield. They want them to be physical. I think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is the same. He wants to be stable so that the front 4 can go and do what they want to do. Van der Beek doesn't do that. And then when you play him at number 10, he's had opportunities. He's not Bruno Fernandes. He's not a ball carrier. He's not a progressive passer. He likes to make clever runs, in behind. He likes to make some of these out-to-in runs. He likes to play one-touch football. But I think the problem is that you can be a good player. And there was a comment last night, Kieran, wasn't there, that, oh, well, Frankie de Jong, you really like Frankie de Jong, and he'd be fantastic at United. Frankie de Jong, why don't we get him? And then why don't we put in the midfield of Bruno and Van der Beek? That doesn't mean that it suddenly works. It just doesn't. So I said this, and I got called reactionary, but I think Donny van der Beek's a fantastic player with fantastic footballing IQ. And I've had James Rowe, obviously Callum and James work very closely together. He's come on. And Joe, you've been on podcasts with James, extremely knowledgeable. And he made some fantastic points. He said that back in October when I brought James back on, he said, I'm not sure the move to United was the right one because you have to play when you move to a big club. You have to play regularly and you have to develop. And another thing that James said as well is he's like, I'm not sure the style fits. Stylistically, Donny van der Beek fits into what Manchester United do. I think the transfer on the surface of it was a good transfer, but I think in the long run, Donny will go, and I think he'll go and play somewhere where it's more suited to him. Doesn't mean he's a bad player. I don't see how, unless he adapts or unless Ollie changes the system, which he's not going to do, how he's a success at Manchester United.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those interesting points, and I'll bring you in here, Callum. Is how important do you think that the players that are brought in? Because again, we've mentioned some of the teams that have been really good in terms of recruitment, and the reason why is because they know the role that they want these players to play. We look at Liverpool when they did start to bring in the likes of Salah, Mane, Van Dijk. Even you go further back and you look at what they did with Henderson. And And we just mentioned Leicester City as well, that they brought in Ndidi, they brought in Tielemans after losing Kante and Mahrez. So how important do you think it is that the recruitment from each one of these teams, it actually does fit the style that the manager wants to play? I guess the poor example of the kind of wasteful recruitment, I think you could say, is probably with Chelsea in the past season, where we saw them spend roughly about 200 million. And we even look today in their FA Cup game, and Kai Havertz isn't even in the squad. And we've seen Werner, and he hasn't been playing as well as we expected. We've seen Ziyech, and he's had some good moments, but nothing close to what it was like at Ajax. And just how important do you think it is, instead of like bringing in, like we said earlier, the big name, is it just more important to get in the player that actually fits the style a manager wants to play?
I think it's vital, but I think even more than the style the manager wants to play, I think you see certain clubs across Europe that have a style that the club want to play, and that's where a quality sporting director comes in. I think of Atletico Madrid. When they signed Suarez in the summer, a lot of people think, he's past it, he's over the hill. He scored a lot of goals this season, and he's proven a lot of people wrong. And that's because he was able to fit the mould of what they want. To use a lesser example, and please stay with me when I mention this one, if you want an example of poor recruitment, I live in Scotland. Look at Celtic. They lost Fraser Forster last season, a 6'7" goalkeeper who's very tall, very commanding, and he's very experienced in UK football. They replaced him with a goalkeeper called Vasilis Barkas, who came from Greece. No experience in British football, very limited use of the language, very lightweight in comparison to Forster, completely didn't work. At centre-back, they brought in Shane Duffy, a guy who reminds me of Maguire, but obviously Maguire's far better. But Duffy's a guy who's got good physical attributes. He can head the ball, and he likes to put himself on the line. He can't play a high line because he doesn't have the recovery pace, and he's actually not very good on the ball. Two things that Celtic do with the other centre-backs have got. So it's important, as you say, clubs don't sign players based on what they think is a good name on paper, because, as I say, with Celtic up here in Scotland, it's been a disaster this season. You've seen it at different clubs before as well. I mean, LVG and Franz Hoek have both spoken about how they wanted Memphis Depay at Manchester United, but a year later than they got him. They wanted him to play another year of decent level football in the Eredivisie with PSV before he made the transfer to United. But such as was the interest in him, he's brought in a year early and he's thrust into it. And as you say, it's about getting the right player at the right time, but it's about getting a player that plays your system, because you're spot on, Haider, when you talk about Van der Beek. Because he's a Dutch international, because he played at Ajax, because he played in that great side that got the Champions League run, people put two and two together and think, right, put him in United's midfield, play him as a holder, play him as an eight, play him as whatever you want, and he'll succeed. As you've said, and you articulated it very well, it's not as easy as that. If it was easy as that, every transfer window, you'd maybe say, right, we'll get these two, they'll come in and they'll just flourish. But the best sides, even Liverpool, in recent years, they might make a signing. Naby Keita, for me, has been a signing at Liverpool who has been good, if not spectacular, considering the money they paid for him. A lot of people expected more of him. And that's what you're going to get in the transfer market, regardless of your budget. So I think you do need to have a set system, a set way of playing, so that you can recruit players that fit into that. And that's what Klopp and Liverpool have been great at in recent years. You think of Diego Jota, I know he got injured. He was brought in, not the biggest name in the world, not even the biggest name in the Premier League. And maybe a few people thought, that's a lot of money to pay. Before he got injured, he was fantastic. He perfectly worked within that Liverpool system. He was able to apply pressure to the players that were already in that front three, and all looked rosy in the garden. So I think it's important, as I say, that you have a set model. United have lacked a sporting director in recent years to deliver that, so have other clubs. And that's something that in the elite level of the game, most sides have, because the way I look at it, if you're progressing in the right direction, if Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was to leave Manchester United tomorrow, United should be able to say, our next coach is going to be a Nagelsmann or whoever it is who's going to come in and take that system and take that style to the next level or to a similar level. you can't flip flop, as you've said earlier, with LVG to Mourinho and Moyes. You need to have a defined style, or at least a defined principle of play, so that your club can be steady regardless of the manager. The best clubs have been able to do that over the years, and it's important now more so than ever that you do, because there's a lot of money that I know obviously the COVID situation's hampered that, but there's a lot of money flashing about in football. United are the sort of side that if United go in for a player from Burnley, they want 40 million rather than 25. So I think it's important, given that you know that's going to be the situation, that you've got a set model of playing and that you can recruit players that fit into it. Because United, due to those constraints that are always going to be placed on them because of their name and who they are, they can't afford too many gambles in the transfer market. Under LVG, under Moyes, there was too many gambles, there was too many signings that left you scratching your head. Schweinsteiger was one of them. The Depay situation, as I mentioned, he wanted him a year later. It gets him at that stage. Falcao coming in and out of nowhere, brilliant, big name. He plays up front. Was he really what United needed at that time when you consider his injury record and style of play that they had? They had Rooney and Van Persie at the time, two older strikers. Why are you adding a third one into the mix? So, as I say, I think it's important that you've got a defined principle, a defined set of principles within your play, so that you can utilise the transfer market to your advantage rather than rely on it. Because I feel that teams that rely on the transfer market, like Chelsea did this summer, put themselves under intense pressure. A lot of teams think, a lot of people that play FIFA or Football Manager probably think, brilliant, they've signed Havertz, they've signed him, they've signed Silva. Wow, this is going to fit. We all know if you sign 6 or 7 players in one window, it doesn't matter whether you're Manchester United or Maidstone United. That's a gamble. It's a big gamble, and you're putting a lot of faith in those players from day dot, which is something that not all of them will handle, because not every footballer, regardless of their stature, will settle at a new club.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one thing that I mentioned at the start, that for anybody's transfer window, there's usually about a 50% success rate. That you bring in 4 players, and 2 of them usually are kind of starting level caliber for the next 3 to 5 seasons. And we've seen it for all top teams. You can kind of look at it. That was, I think, a really good kind of sum up of kind of what we wanted to talk about in terms of just how important the actual model of a club is. I always mention it because there's a lot of United fans, like you said there, Callum, that they're big into kind of the FIFA Football Manager and that they want all these big names coming in, and then don't want to give the credit to some of these young academy players that do come through and actually do produce. Because what we have to remember is that is part of the football club. And you mentioned it earlier on in the show today, that it's important that some of these other teams, like Man City, when we talk about Phil Foden, that they bring players through, that Chelsea do as well. I guess the unfortunate thing that, and it's the last kind of topic I want to talk about today, is some of the stuff that we've been seeing on social media in relation to a lot of these players. We've seen it in terms of for referees as well with Mike Dean this week, that there's been a lot of kind of negative comments and there's been a lot of threats that's been going on in social media. So, Joe, I'm going to bring you in for kind of this to start off. How big of an issue is this becoming, or has it even changed really in the past kind of 10 years? Because I was reading a story today about I think it's the West Brom defender, Kyle Bartlett, he was abused 10 years ago on social media, and he came out today and had a story there that said it hasn't changed at all. And what I wonder, and I was thinking about this today, was, are we seeing this more now because there's no fans in the stadium and that there's more people online while a game is going on? Or is it just that there's people now that maybe are bored with stuff that's going on in the pandemic and are now just hurling all the abuse at players? Because we've always mentioned it on the show, there's a huge difference between critiquing somebody's performance, so whether you want to say it's about a player or it's about a referee, and saying that you disagree with it, versus what we've seen in the past 2 to 3 weeks, where we've seen some vile comments being thrown at pretty much any professional. I've seen it in multiple sports. I saw it in rugby just after the weekend, where one of the Irish kickers, where he was supposed to get it out of play and ended up losing the game for the team. And for the next half hour after that game, all you could see online was vicious comments about him and his family. And we're seeing that. We saw the same thing from Mike Dean, where he didn't want to referee a game this weekend because of all the threats that were going on with his family. So do you think this is this a new thing that's happened in recent years, or do you think that this is just something that we're seeing a lot more now?
No, it's definitely not a new thing. It's not a new thing with social media. I think it's been a problem for social media ever since social media come along. And it's such a shame because things like Twitter especially has brought us so much closer, hasn't it, to our idols, to our athletes. And it looks like from day one, people have just tried their best to sabotage it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a privilege. I mean, before social media, you didn't get access to athletes being this open anywhere. You get the odd television interview here and there, or the odd radio interview where they'd open up on things. But let's be honest, 90% of athletes who are on social media are very open about their lives, about their situation. And, they're happy to interact with fans as well. We see them come on to podcasts, not this podcast, but obviously on, higher profile podcasts. They come on to, they go and do Q&As on their own Twitter pages. Access to them now is brilliant. One thing that worries me about it all in the last 24 hours especially is actually the response from the social media platforms. I've been a little bit concerned from the response from people like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, almost keen to sort of play down what they can do, with all this. And I think, look, I don't know the answer. If I did, I probably wouldn't be sat here doing this now. I'd be earning lots of money and the world would be a better place. But I do think they have to take more responsibility. I mean, football's response to Facebook and Instagram and Twitter in the last 24 hours is that it's a safe haven for people to abuse people like this. And it's absolutely spot on. It is. So what can these platforms do in the way that they are shaped and the way that they're run to take that away from people, to take that safety net away from these abusers so that they can't do it? They have to find the answers for that. And the problem that, I think you're right, Kieran. I do think, obviously, since lockdown, we probably are seeing more of it simply because people are struggling at the moment with life, mental health, their ability to be able to vent, everything like that. We know when we're at football matches, a lot of people get things off their chest, in the 90 minutes that they're there. They're screaming and shouting abuse for 90 minutes. So they probably don't feel the need then to go home and do it on Twitter because they've just spent 90 minutes plus maybe half an hour on the journey home doing it. So
that's
by the time
really
they've
good
got
point,
home,
Joe. It's not something I thought about.
By the time they got home, but look, I'm not saying that's in any way an excuse for them to start doing it on Twitter now. And there's one thing saying to a referee at a football match, you don't know what you're doing, you're rubbish, you're an expletive. But then to go to the next level and death threats. I think we did a little section on social media last week, didn't we, Kieran? And I said, what I don't understand about it is for someone to put abuse out there, you have to go through two major steps in your head. One of them steps is that you have to think it in the first place. You have to have these thoughts going around in your head to even think it. But then secondly, making that conscious decision then to go onto a platform and say it and aim it at somebody. And I just don't understand it. I said to you before, when we lose or when the result doesn't go our way, I'm angry. I am very angry. And what I do is I go to bed and I sleep it off if it's an evening game. At no point do I ever think about picking up my phone and aiming this abuse at people. I just don't know where it comes from. I can't comprehend it in my head. Probably Callum and Haider are in a better position to talk about this. I know Haider, for example, I know you've obviously been unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end of abuse on social media, so you're definitely in a much better place to talk about it than I am. But, there's just so much processes you have to go through to get to a stage where you think it's right to do this that just doesn't comprehend in my mind. But what I find most concerning about it all, Kieran, is the way that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter still, even though we have in all these cases at the moment, not just in sport, but in society as well, and yet just reading between the lines of a lot of what they're saying, it's as if it's either not their problem or they don't know what they can do, but that's just not good enough for me. I don't know what the other guys think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's become a big issue. And one of the things that I think is really good that you said is the whole idea that you have to both think it, write it down, and you even have to go one step further is even when you write stuff down, I know a lot of people that do deal with mental health, and when they do see therapists and stuff, they will get you to write your feelings down. But then you actually have to then make another conscious decision to press that send and actually send it out to the world.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing. And it's one other point that you made that actually I did very similar to Haider. I didn't think of it, is that a lot of these people that probably are like this are used to, after a game, going to the pub with their friends, talking about it, kind of talking about all these players and what they did wrong and kind of abusing them there and kind of their own little social group. But the problem now, I think, is people's social group is now becoming just online. And again, it's a big issue because, and I think the social media platform set a really bad precedent when there was, I think, more racial behavior that was happening at a more national level, both for the UK government and also over in the United States, and they didn't really do anything about it. So I think there's a lot of people that see that and they're like, well, if they're not gonna punish some of these kind of higher profile people, what are they gonna do for someone that has 13 or 14 followers that are just gonna hurl any sort of abuse? We see it now every game now, Haider. I think since it started at the start of the season with Wilfried Zaha, I think every single game we're now hearing about players being racially abused and referees now being sent death threats. And it's honestly, I feel like over the last 2 weeks, it's just getting worse and worse. And at some point, there's going to be a boiling point to where something has to happen.
I'm going to be very brief on this because it's, people like this don't really deserve the airtime. But there are a lot of people out there, and they're starting to rear their head on Twitter. You're starting to see people's true colors, I think, in the last 2-3 months. And when someone's defending it because of, free speech, because there's a lot of people doing that, people that I've followed for a very long time, and you're genuinely you're seeing people for what they are now. Anyone that's saying that, and Joe's mentioned, I've received a lot of racial abuse in my life. I receive it even when podcasting. Oh, you BAME guys, you just do it for money. I don't make any money from this. But this is what I receive. The time when I had Jamie Jackson on and the comments weren't working from Periscope, and there was someone laying in being racist. Luckily I didn't see that while I was doing the show. But these sort of things that I see, I've received. Anyone that has been racially abused, it's the most degrading thing ever. It's genuinely, you are stripped of your humanity. And so when someone says, oh, it's just a few words, or we need to protect freedom of speech, it's something that just, for me, I just don't engage in it. It's just the block button. Because if that's how someone really thinks, it's not really a minority anymore. We're seeing it a lot. On the players as well. It's a tough one because, I actually am of the view that the club need to turn around to players and say, right, well, look, maybe it's time you disable your comments, these sort of things. But then, Clinton Morris came out with a fantastic thing the other day, his little monologue saying, why should they go off? These people shouldn't be doing this. The social media companies need to. It's a difficult one. I mean, honestly, if I was in a position of power like that, I wouldn't have social media because it opens yourself up to that. But that's just my personal opinion. It is right that you shouldn't just bow down to what they do and let them win. But it's a really sad situation. Every time United lose, that's another reason why I fear United losing. It's not even the result. It's the fact that I know that some of our black players are going to get racially abused. And, you don't even... It's not just black players, though. The abuse that Maguire gets, the abuse that De Gea has been getting all week, it's just disgusting. It's like, what gives you the right to speak to someone like that? I speak about someone like that. And this is what I don't understand. And unfortunately, it's when we come down to content, and it's really great to see, what Callum's obviously doing fantastically well. He works with Phil, and Phil's risen as well to the top of the game in Man United podcast. But the sad thing is that there's so many channels out there that stir up this hate and anger. They're the ones with the numbers. So it's nice to see, Callum's doing fantastically well with Phil. It's nice to see their podcast at the top, and they're doing it because they're not abusing the players left, right, and center. But this is a problem. It's a societal problem. People would rather have a clickbait headline rather than sit down and actually listen to a podcast like this, where we're sitting down, we're actually breaking things down analytically, going diving deep into topics. These are the sort of things that society doesn't have the patience for. So, Aaron's comments absolutely spot on. It's abhorrent, but it's tough because I've received racial abuse every day of my life, and it's always going to be there, and that's what I have to live with. So, that for me, it upsets me, because when I see stuff happen to Axel, it really upsets. It does. I get really down about it, and what's going to change? It's so many people are doing so much great work, but it's not going to change, is it?
Yeah, it's a tough one as well, because where I start to get annoyed is when I start to see a lot of the analysts talk about it on Sky Sports, and not so much BT, but Sky Sports, when the same company you see posting articles and sharing articles from, I know there was one that came out today about Amad Diallo, which I don't really want to get into, but again, have a read of what actually happened there, and the fact that it's the same things that happened with Phil Foden and Mason Greenwood at the start of the season, that there was mistakes that were clearly made, and after about a week, the story stopped for Phil Foden, but they continued for Mason Greenwood for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and it's something that isn't going away, and it's a whole society issue. It's not just these couple of people that, obviously it's terrible that there's a lot of this racial abuse, and there's that, but it's also just abuse, like you said, Haider, to footballers in general. I mentioned the amount of abuse that I saw to the Irish out half Billy Burns after the game at the weekend, which is ridiculous considering that he played in his first Six Nations game and he made a mistake. And for the 45 minutes after the game, all I see is abuse on his Twitter page. And we're seeing this happen the whole time now. And it's kind of ridiculous that we have gotten to this point where people feel like it's acceptable to spread their own hate, to send private messages to these footballers and their families. It's not just to these footballers. We saw with Martial and his wife got more abuse than he did, and it's become a big problem. So basically, to kind of finish up and have the kind of last word on this column is, what has your opinion been? Because obviously this has been very out in the public over the past few weeks, and what do you think maybe even the Premier League needs to do to try and protect some of these players, especially some of the younger players that are just at the beginning of their career?
I think one of the things I would like to say is the racist abuse is abhorrent. It's archaic. There's no excuse for it. Abuse of someone's gender, we've seen that with Karen Carney, is abhorrent. It's archaic. There's no excuse. Whether it's someone's sexuality or whatever it may be as well, there's no excuse for that too. The other thing that I've been on the other end of, and you guys I'm sure will have been as well, is the sort of abuse of envy. I received an email sent to me on the anniversary of my father's death, encouraging me to go and cry over my dead dad. And I'll be honest with you, that day I received that message. It was via email, and I'll be honest with you, and the person that are listening are probably laughing right now, getting the desired reaction, but it really cut me up, because I thought to myself, yes, okay, right, I started this in January 2020. It's risen quite quickly. I've spoken to some really high-profile footballers that maybe this person or whoever it may be might want to speak to themselves, but there's a difference between not liking what someone does and being downright offensive and abusive. Because to give you a daft example, right, one of the programmes I don't personally like is Mrs. Thank you very much, Aaron. One of the programmes I don't like is Mrs. Brown's Boys. I see tons of people abuse the actors on Twitter. I would never do that myself. I would just turn the channel over, because I personally don't like it. It's the same way where my fiance is not a big fan of football. So when I've got football on, she's on the tablet watching something else, or she's watching the TV and I'm watching something of the football on the tablet, because there's personal choice and personal preference. And unfortunately for so many of these people, for whatever reason, they can't see it as a preference as to what they do. I totally agree with you, Joe. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with all of you. I have felt angry when a football team has lost. I have felt distraught when a football team's lost. You think of the Spurs game this season. That was a terrible, terrible defeat. I never once thought about getting my phone and saying, right, who am I going to, which footballer am I going to abuse here? Because one, for me, I just think personally, it's a stupid thing to do. Whether your account's anonymous or whether it's not, it's a stupid thing to do. Number two, your team's just been hammered and you're frustrated. Do you think racially abusing or personally abusing someone's going to make them want to up their performance? As I say, if you ask me honestly, it's going to demotivate them. If anything, it's going to get them to say, you know, I can't be dealing with this anymore. And the third thing I'd like to say, and Joe summed it up earlier, now you get closer to athletes than before. Ian Wright, when he came on Twitter, his tagline, he might have changed it now, but it used to be Twitter where strangers become friends. And he told a story that I think it was his 1 millionth follower, whoever it was, he invited to play a game at Wembley. That's something Ian Wright was doing. And they're actually very close friends to this day. Didn't know each other, normal guy and Ian Wright, connected through Twitter. And unfortunately, Ian said this in recent times. He also put a tweet out this week because he took someone to court over racist abuse towards himself. And that person, unfortunately, for whatever reason, wasn't prosecuted, which just defies logic for me. I think that's the issue that these idiots don't understand. If you want to have a chat with Marcus Rashford or even a former Manchester United player like I'm trying to think, Norman Whiteside, Willie Morgan, whoever it may be, you can do that at the moment. But the more you abuse and the more hate that you throw out there, eventually these guys, these women, these famous sports icons and celebrities and people of note will simply employ a PR company to hire to handle their tweets, and they won't take anything to do with it. And the tweets will be very, very I'd say unemotive. It'll be great result today, glad to have the 3 points. And these same people that abuse these players will say, oh, that's rubbish. We don't get to hear from them the way we used to. We don't get to do this and do that. And you would just love to say to them, that's your fault. You've created such a negative atmosphere that people feel that they can't be themselves. And the moment you do that in society, whether you're 8 years old, 18 or 80, you're wrong. You have to accept in life people are going to have different viewpoints. Of course they are. And I don't want to get personal with Twitter because they'll probably kick me off for saying this, but I think Twitter's got a lot to answer for in this. Twitter lost its ability to compromise. The leader of the so-called free world, who's thankfully now, I don't normally give him a political views, he's not in charge anymore. He was allowed a platform for 4 years to spread hate and lies, and they took action on it in the last month of his presidency. But they let him away
last
for
few days, even, I think.
Last few days, 3 years, 11 months, and 28 days. That platform with 60 million followers was there, day in, day out, spreading division, spreading conflict, and nothing was done. And then now they've addressed that, but I would argue that the damage was done by Twitter and other platforms. Then they didn't stamp it out when it had to be stamped out. And when you see someone of the ilk of the character, who I don't even want to name, who had nearly 100 million followers, when he's spewing hate and division, if you've got 12 followers, you probably look up at that. Some people probably do and think, see if he can do that, I'm going to do that. I'm like him. And unfortunately, we're in a position now where all of these social media companies, as you've all rightfully mentioned, are on the back foot. The thing that I heard last week that really horrified me was, I think it might have been one of them, emojis don't count as racist abuse. Very quickly, the PR tack very quickly changed, thankfully, a day or two after. But emojis aren't racist abuse. Of course they are. If you're naive enough to say that they aren't, then you're going to stoke more hate, because the people that have been kicked off Twitter will make another fake Twitter with an egg profile picture or the profile picture of a character from Father Ted or whatever it is they go about doing, and they will simply use emojis rather than words. You have to stamp it out in written form. You have to stamp it out in audio form, video form, and emoji form. Every form of abuse is wrong. I agree with Haider. I'm not someone who says people shouldn't be allowed free speech, not at all. But there's a difference between free speech and hatred and hate speech. And that's something that people should never, ever confuse or allow there to be a crossover of. Because free speech is me saying, I'll be honest, Haider, I don't like this player that plays up front for United. I think he's poor. I think he's lacklustre, blah, blah, blah. You come back and you completely disagree and we have a debate. That's free speech. Me just saying, I don't like that guy that plays up front for United because he's X, Y, and Z. That's abuse. That's hate speech. There's a complete difference. And until these companies stamp down on that and recognise the difference, we won't go anywhere, because there's too many eggs or whatever their pictures are out there who think, I'm not accountable. I've made a fake email address. I've made a fake name. I can just do what I want. This is great. I can go to my work 9 to 5 and nobody will know about it. Until people are accountable for their words, their actions, their pictures, their voice messages, whatever it may be, it won't be stamped out. And I just hope this is the wake-up call of all wake-up calls for it to be dealt with, because it's disgraceful, it's abhorrent, and it needs to go, because the archaic times are gone. When people say, I used to watch that programme in the 70s and they said that word, it's not the 70s anymore. That time's been gone and we don't want to go backwards. We want to start moving forward.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the key kind of comments that you made, that these social media platforms, they have to do something, because the hatred is just getting worse. And it's to the point of, before you saw it and you could just kind of ignore it, but now there's so much of it that you see. Like I opened up my timeline pretty much every single day when there's notifications, and bar none, you'll see something, and it's getting worse. And one of the points that you made about kind of Donald Trump, where it was the last few days, and now they announced that he's never going to be allowed back on to Twitter. But as we saw, and I don't particularly like getting too political on the show, but we saw what happened in Washington, and the real impact of what can happen because of social media. And the problem is, how long do the social media companies, as the Premier League, or how long are they going to wait before one of these players actually gets attacked when fans are led back into the stadium? And that's one of the biggest, I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have, that I think people are starting to get too comfortable with spreading this hatred and kind of putting this onto the players. And we need to get to the point when we can actually, people can't be put accountable. You shouldn't be able to, if you create a profile and you get suspended, you shouldn't be able to just create a new one. There should be, whether it's when you're signing up, you have to have your ID that signs you up. So like, for example, I know on other apps, so like I know over here in Ireland that we have a GoCar app, that where you have to send in your driving license and they approve it from there. I feel like the same thing should have to happen with the social media companies. It can be encrypted so that nobody else can get to it, but at some point is you have to be able to protect the people that are using the platform, especially when those are kind of exposed people that are out in the middle of public all the time. So yeah, it's a tough one. And look, I would love to be able to say that we won't talk about this in the future, but the problem is it's becoming a storyline every single week, and that's kind of the biggest issue. So I guess it's good. I think it's good that we get to talk about it in terms of what we think should be done about it, because there's a lot of people that, like you said, Callum, that are starting to come under the impression that by using an emoji, it's not hatred or it's not offensive. But again, I always say is, if you use any sort of word and one person finds it offensive, it's offensive. And that's it. And that's the way it should work. You may think, oh, well, it only means this. But again, if you've said something and it offends one person, well, then you shouldn't be using that, because to that person, it's offensive. And look, I think at the end, it's good that we get to talk about it. It's good that we can kind of put our feelings out there, that what needs to be done. But again, personally, and I don't know about you guys, but I hold my breath that anything's actually going to be done about this, because it never is. But hopefully over kind of the next few weeks and months, it can just go back to just the football, because the fact that we've had now a referee who's been a staple of the Premier League for 2 decades now in Mike Dean doesn't want to referee this weekend because of all the abuse he got. That's next level. That's never happened before. And I know that there's been other referees that have gotten abuse, but honestly, the abuse came from other managers. We saw, like, who was it? Was it Colina that before that he got a lot of abuse from Jose Mourinho and didn't ref in the Champions League the next week? We've seen that happen before, but we've never seen it just from kind of death threats from fans and from kind of teams. You've even seen, like, Souček came out to tell people to stop, that it's just a game, it doesn't actually matter. So it's a big thing that hopefully over the next kind of few weeks and months there can be some plan in place between the Premier League and the social media platforms. It's good that you're seeing the big clubs come out and talk about it, because before I think they didn't do that enough. They just kind of brushed it under the carpet and said, let's just let the Premier League, let's let social media deal with it. But I think now you're seeing with, I know United came out to say something, Liverpool as well. And I think the more clubs that actually come out and do stuff, it might, even if it affects 10% of the people that are doing it, at least it'll help in that side of things. But anyway, I just want to say thanks for joining me today, guys. It's been really interesting, a lot of really good topics today. So just want to remind everybody just to subscribe to the Hollow Sports podcast on YouTube. Again, we're on Spotify, Instagram, Twitter, basically anywhere you can get your podcasts. So thanks for joining me today, guys, and I'll see you next time.
Pleasure. All the best.
Cheers, mate.